Sometimes I read comments from viewers who claim that the methods I employ appear complex and full of extra steps, and I just don't get it. In my view, the methods I choose are the most straightforward, most logical and universally obvious ones possible. But then, just the other day, as I was reflecting on my ongoing raised floor project, it dawned on me that maybe, just maybe, there might have been a simpler way to construct this floor. The simpler way would have been to construct the base first and then cover it with plain wooden planks. This would create a solid sturdy surface, but would also look dull and boring. With the base hidden from view in the final result, we wouldn't need to worry over deviations of a few millimeters in the construction. How nice that would have been. Instead, in the model I've opted for, the base will be completely visible. Additionally, we'll be covering the holes with plywood plates, all of which must have precisely the same dimensions. This implies that we must arrange the elements of the base frame with the utmost precision, down to the millimeter, in fact, down to the half millimeter. More on this later. For now, let's get back to where we ended the last video, where you remember I was experimenting on how to best cut the beams. I tried the circular saw with the blade mounted in reverse. I tried the jigsaw either alone or in combination with the Japanese saw. I cut the remaining beams with the Japanese saw as this was the one offering the best result at the time. But I ended up using my bandsaw, which I completely forgot about until that moment. For now, let's get started by attaching some of the wooden beams. Meanwhile, I've received the plastic stands upon which the entire floor will rest. I will begin here in the right side corner. I'm going to use these screws. They have the perfect length to fit the beams. I will place them one atop the other in the middle and drill 2 pilot holes using a thinner drill. Later, I will countersink these holes with a wider drill. At this point, I will screw the beams on without any glue, allowing for fine adjustment later on once more beams are attached. The difficulty with this build arises from the sheer number of rows and columns, so to speak, that this checkered pattern will have. In my final design, we will have 9 rows and 9 columns, with each rectangle being the same size. To determine the correct length and width of each plate, we need to perform a few calculations. This is important to the story, so please bear with me. The total width is 4,290 millimeters. From this, we need to deduct the width of the 10 beams, which is 10 times 40, so 400 millimeters in total. We divide this by the number of columns, 9, to get the width for our plates, which is 432.222 millimeters, or approximately 43.22 centimeters. Now we can't precisely measure to the 10th of a millimeter, but we can approximately measure to the half millimeter. And herein lies the problem. To make a long story short, the issue lies in the fact that no matter which measurable number we choose, we will necessarily introduce some error. And this error is then multiplied by 9 since we have 9 columns. After testing for several days, we found that the number that worked for us was 43.25 centimeters. Not 43.20, nor 43.30, 43.25. With the right side completed, we can now shift our focus to the left side. Here, I will repeat the exact same process, putting the utmost importance on positioning the beams absolutely precisely. For this, I'm gonna take the necessary time to arrange the beams before drilling and screwing them down. With the longitudinal beams attached to the rear 2 beams, the structure already starts to make a serious impression, and my doubts about my ability to finish this project slowly fade away. Splitting the floor into 2 parts definitely makes it more manageable for a single person. At this point, I'll leave the beams only half tightened to allow for corrections and to achieve that half millimeter precision. Next, it's time to cut the dozens of cross beams with the bandsaw. To begin putting the frame together, as always, I'm going to conduct a few tests to figure out the best approach, understand how the materials behave, and get a general feel for what I'm about to do. Speaking of testing, I had my DNA tested with today's video sponsor, myheritage DNA. For a small fee, they will send you a DNA testing kit with which you can harvest your DNA and then send it to myheritage for analysis. After only a few weeks, you'll get your test results showing you the ethnical composition of your DNA. Alright, so let's have a look at these results. Oh, I'm 30% English. Wasn't expecting that. 22% Iberian, that's also a surprise. 19.6% North African, that I was actually expecting, since one of my grandparents comes from North Africa. 12% Greek and South Italian, okay. And then 15% 4 more ethnicities. Alright, so there you have it. As you can see, I'm quite a colorful specimen. MyHeritage also provides a list of DNA matches, which could potentially lead to finding lost family members. In my case, for example, I found 75 matches from the tiny country of Luxembourg, which is where I'm from. Now, if you're curious about the composition of your ethnicity, MyHeritage actually has a promotion right now. You can click the link in the description or scan the QR code here on the screen. And with that, let's get back to the video. Next, I'm going to loosen the longitudinal beams so I can add some wood glue between the two pieces of wood. Before the glue fully cures, I'm going to add the cross beams between this set of longitudinal beams. Then, I'm going to use a tension strap to push them into the right position. Next, I'm going to add the markings for the first row of cross beams on this side of the floor. I'm going to loosely put those in place and add another tension strap to hold them. Now we have the first sample to get an idea of what the floor could look like. A friend of mine then suggested the idea of offsetting each row by half its length, which could potentially create a more interesting look. Now that we've decided on our final pattern, I'm going to measure and mark the positions of the cross beams onto one of the longitudinal beams to ensure it aligns correctly along the entire length. As shown here, I had to make some final adjustments, barely 1.5 millimeters, but it's a necessary adjustment to maintain identical dimensions for all the rectangles in our future floor. We are now about 1 week into this project. Progress is slow, due to the high precision requirement and the need to figure out and test various aspects. If unaddressed, these issues could lead to disastrous results during the build. To give you one example, we have to attach all the cross beams to the outermost longitudinal beams, because once they're screwed down, it will be impossible to drill and insert the screws from one side. Fortunately, my friend was visiting to help me with this build, so he pulled out the entire structure to make room, allowing us to drill from the outside. Here I'm attaching the first crossbeam from only one side, because I don't want to secure the crossbeams from both sides until the entire structure is tied to the frame of the boat. With the first crossbeams attached on one side and the other side remaining loose at this point, we can position the structure against the wall and screw it onto the frame of the boat. This is a good time to check if the door still opens, and it does. With that confirmed, we are ready to move on. At this point, we attach the forward long crossbeam using 8 mm dowels. My friend showed me a few tricks on how to use the fastening clamps more effectively. Like this, for example, it's possible to pull one beam tight onto another at a 90-degree angle. This technique allows us to precisely position the beam and accurately drill the hole for the dowel, ensuring it doesn't slip out of its ideal position, not even the slightest bit. Next, we applied some wood glue and firmly tapped the dowels in place with a hammer. Finally, I put the fastening clamps back on and put the beams together. At this point, I should have the perfect measurement of 43.25 millimeters. And that's how we attached the forward beam. My goal was to ensure that no screws would be visible from the outside, so I hope with the use of the dowels we achieved that. After attaching the left side to the rear, we started to install the crossbeams in the offset pattern I mentioned earlier. As crazy as it may seem to build such a structure on a boat, you have to admit that it looks anything but boring. And just because of that, in my opinion, the extra effort is worth it. Anyway, at this point, the hardest part is almost done, the hardest part being figuring out different methods, getting a hang of the materials, and streamlining the workflows. Now, with the concept fully developed and proven, it was just a matter of repeating the same method over and over again to install the remaining crossbeams for the entire 16 square meters of floor space. There are a total of 76 crossbeams to be installed for this floor. It takes between 20 and 40 minutes to install a single crossbeam, depending on whether any complications arise, and this gives you an idea of how many hours we spent creating just the structure for our raised floor. But eventually the structure was complete, and what a sight it already was. At this point we also installed most of the remaining stands that the structure rests on. So far, so good. I'm going to use the good old film-faced plywood plates, the same ones that I used for the floors in my first boat. These are made of birchwood, a wood perfectly suited to use as a floor. One side is flat and shiny, almost like glass, and allows the use of a suction handle. This way I can test if the plywood plate fits within all the rectangles of the entire frame. I will create a frame inside each rectangle using wooden strips that are 13 millimeters thick. Each element of the frame within the frame needs to be cut, drilled and countersunk, hundreds of pieces in total. I'll explain more about this in a moment. For now, let's see how the first plywood plate looks inside the frame. Before I install the remaining plywood plates, however, I will first level out the entire structure with the stands and screw these to the frame. The stands come in different varieties. Some of them have two threaded sections like this one and can be adjusted in one or the other direction. Next we have to level out the stands because they can only work properly if they sit within the entire width of the base on a level surface. Next it's time to sand the entire frame. I use the orbital sander with 120 grit sandpaper. The sanded down frame has an appealing look, making me increasingly confident that I didn't quite mess this up. The joints between the pieces of wood would mostly become invisible, leaving an impression of a very smooth, solid structure. At this point I received the pre-cut plywood plates, so it was time to install them one by one. If there's ever an opportunity to develop a good workflow, it's when you have to install 85 pieces of something. And in this way, my workflow improved over time, which I will show you in a moment. What I can say for now is that this wasn't completed in one day. It actually took me about a week to get all the plates put in place. I had to cheat a little for the time being by installing only two sides of the inner frame. This approach not only allowed me to progress more quickly than if I installed the entire frame for each plate, but also provided flexibility to make changes and fixes if any issues were to arise down the line. The other thing I can say is that this is one of the most rewarding tasks I have ever done on any of my boats. Seeing the plates fit so well into the squares which we built so painstakingly and seeing the floor slowly take shape is very satisfying to watch. Manufacturing the various pieces for the inner frame was quite time-consuming in and of itself. I sped up the process by creating a template and always drilling through two pieces at a time. Despite the fact that this frame will be hidden from view, I couldn't resist countersinking each one of the holes to ensure the screws sit flush once the frame is in place. With the two pieces of the inner frame prepared in this manner, I was able to install the plates quite quickly. I would always install 9 or 12 at a time. Right now, before we move on to the finish line, let me briefly explain my technique for getting the plywood plates to sit flush within the frame. Namely, I would attach two sides of the inner frame with a fastening clamp in such a way that it's just loose enough to be pushed into the right position without falling off completely. I can then place the plywood plate on top and gently tap and push it down until it's perfectly flush with all the sides of the frame. Once I'm happy with the position, I screw on one side of the inner frame at first. Then I put the plate back and get it to sit flush on the opposite side. Once I screwed down that part of the frame, I repeat the same with the 4 pieces from the remaining 2 sides. And that's how I eventually built the inner frames for all 85 of the floor plates. Right now, let's move on to installing the remaining of the floor plates in the exact same fashion as we did before. The moment I placed the last plywood plate and realized the floor was finally finished, the pain and sorrow of the previous 2 months lifted like a huge weight off my shoulders. But it's not quite finished just yet, because in order to preserve the wood and protect it from the elements, we're going to remove 1/3 of the plates at a time and then apply the so-called hard wax oil. This was recommended to me by a carpenter and is apparently the go-to product for parquet floors and similar wood surfaces. Of course, we also sealed the open sides of the plywood plates. And after a couple of coats of hard wax oil and a day of drying for each coat, we could put the plates back one last time, clean them up a little, and so here is the finished floor. And it turned out 1,000 times better than I ever expected. If there's ever a project where you get to know your own character, this is it. Throughout the entire project, we were tempted to cut corners and make approximations just to finish faster. However, each time we had to come to our senses and hold on to our uncompromising quest for absolute precision, because only in this way would the entire structure work. Since the available space is limited and the different sections are obtained by dividing the area into equal parts, a single deviation of only a millimeter at any place in the structure will have devastating effects on the entire structure as a whole. Oh, how we cursed ourselves throughout the build for deciding on this unforgiving design. But in my opinion, it really makes a difference and elevates this boat into a category of its own, blurring the lines between craftsmanship and art. To give you an idea of the level of precision, let's get closer and you will discover that the deviations are so small they can only be seen when you get really, really close. For comparison, you can see the deviation in this spot is only about 1/3 of the thickness of a euro cent. And it's the same in pretty much all the areas. Wherever you look, the fit is nearly perfect. With this done, I can now find peace of mind and we are ready to start our new life on top of this floor, as this is where we will spend most of our time on this boat. I hope that my story will inspire you and that you will find out that you too can achieve the things which today you deem impossible. P.S. You may have noticed that I didn't post a new video in quite a while, and some of you have asked if I was okay or if something had happened. The answer is yes and yes. We are fine, and something did happen. In fact, a bunch of things happened. In Germany we say, ein Unglück kommt selten allein, which translates to the English saying, when it rains, it pours. You may also have noticed in the intro and outro shots that we are back to anchoring at the lake closer to the Berlin city center. This is due to a major change in law here on the Berlin waterways that hit us like a boatload of bricks and caused massive delays in my YouTube activities. And of course, there are a bunch of other non-boat related things as always in life. But rest assured that we will keep fighting and I will keep making these videos. In fact, in one of my upcoming videos, I will provide more details about this recent law change. Till then, thank you very much and take care. Remember to get your discount at myheritage by clicking the link in the description or scanning the QR code and adding the coupon code MyFirstBoat for free shipping, and they also offer a 30-day free trial.